Chapter 1. Birth. Sunlight timidly filtered through the wooden panels of the Zenin estate, illuminating the austere and solemn atmosphere that characterized the powerful family. That morning, the silence in the hallways was heavier than usual. The maids moved nervously, while the guards remained vigilant, as if the air was thick with an invisible tension. Inside one of the estate's most private rooms, Naobito Zenin, the clan leader, stood with his arms crossed, his expression impassive. The air was stifling, but he showed no sign of discomfort. In front of him, his wife lay on the bed, exhausted after hours of labor. Another one, Naobito murmured, almost to himself. Another Zenin. The mother's scream echoed in the room, followed by the sharp cry of a newborn. The midwives hurried to receive her, cleaning her with expert hands. One of them carefully wrapped the baby in a blanket and, trembling, approached Naobito, who extended his arms indifferently. "Well?" he asked, not taking his eyes off the small bundle. The midwife lowered her head and presented the baby, whose cries had now softened to small murmurs. Naobito's face remained expressionless, though his eyes coldly scrutinized the child. "It's a girl, Naobito-sama." Naobito observed the baby in silence for a few moments. Her small, narrow eyes shone with an unusual intensity. There was something about her, a presence that made itself known even in her most vulnerable state. She was different. "We'll name her Makima," he declared, offering no further discussion. Without another word, Naobito turned and left the room, leaving the midwives and the newborn's mother behind. Once the clan leader had left, the women gathered around the mother, carefully and respectfully. They handed her the baby, who squirmed restlessly in the blankets. Makima's mother gazed at her daughter with a mixture of tenderness and pride. The baby's small body curled against her as she sought her mother's breast to nurse. Her reddish-brown hair, identical to her mother's, reflected the soft light in the room. With every breath her daughter took, the mother felt a deeper, almost inexplicable connection, as if destiny had already carved out a grand path for her. "You will be strong, my little one," the mother whispered in a soft yet firm voice, gently stroking Makima's head as the baby continued to feed. "And no one will ever bend you, no one will stand above you." Her words were a promise. In the Zenin clan, power was everything. And though Naobito was a demanding man, Makima's mother saw in her daughter a future even greater, one that even her husband could not foresee. Little Makima, not yet understanding the words, seemed calmer, as if deep down, she was already absorbing those ideas. The mother smiled, certain that her daughter would carry with her a strength that no one could challenge. "My sweet girl, no matter what comes, you will be invincible." The mother softly caressed Makima's face, noticing the unusual calmness the newborn radiated. She felt there was something deeper in those moments of connection, as if her daughter, from her very first breath, already possessed an unsettling presence, something she couldn't yet explain but which filled her with pride and a slight unease. When the baby had finished feeding, the midwives helped the mother lie down again. Though she was still weak from the labor, a warmth enveloped her. "Take your time to rest, ma'am," one of the midwives said. "We'll take the little one to her room when you're ready." The mother nodded gratefully, but she couldn't take her eyes off Makima, who was now peacefully asleep in her arms. Though just a baby, something about her exuded power and authority, even in the stillness of her slumber. After a while, when the mother felt more recovered, the midwives gently wrapped Makima in a soft blanket. After a final caress of her daughter's head, the mother let them take her away. "Take good care of her," she whispered, her eyes following them as they left the room. "She's special, I know it." Makima was taken to the room prepared for her, but even as she was carried away, the mother felt a deep bond. She knew her daughter would not be ordinary and that something in the child's fate was beyond even the Zenin clan elders' predictions. Inside, the air was filled with the scent of incense, and in an improvised cradle lay the newborn. Makima, with her reddish-brown hair and golden eyes, quietly observed her surroundings. She didn't cry, as if from her first breath she already understood everything around her. Naoya approached with an arrogant smirk, looking down at the small figure in the cradle. "So this is our sister, huh?" he remarked with disdain. "Another girl, she won't be of much use to the clan." Makima, despite her young age, slightly turned her head in his direction, her eyes locking onto Naoya's. Something in that gaze made him pause. For a brief moment, Naoya felt an unease he couldn't explain. "Naoya," one of his brothers said sternly, "watch your words." She is a Zenin. Naoya scoffed and stepped away from the cradle, but he couldn't help casting one last cautious glance at Makima. 4 years later, the Zenin clan had always been a family divided by strength and weakness. Contempt for those without cursed techniques was common, and internal rivalries were fierce. Maki and Makima's cousins, had already begun to feel the weight of the clan's expectations and prejudices, especially Maki, who did not possess traditional cursed energy. Despite being only a child, Makima was already showing signs of her power. In her room, she would play with invisible chains that floated around her, obeying her will, though no one knew how she did it. She was always silent, observing others' behavior with a presence so unsettling that even adults avoided her. One day, while Maki and Mai were practicing with wooden weapons in the courtyard, they heard light footsteps. They turned their heads to see their little cousin approaching them with her characteristic silence. "What do you want, Makima?" Maki asked, crouching to her height, unable to ignore the fact that at just 4 years old, Makima already had a gaze that unsettled her. Makima said nothing at first. She just stood there, watching them practice. After a few moments, however, she raised her hand, and suddenly, both girls felt a strange pressure around their bodies. Something invisible was wrapping around them, like invisible hands. What are you doing?" Mai asked, eyes wide as she tried to move, but her body wouldn't respond. Maki tried to resist, but she couldn't move either. The pressure slowly increased, as if something larger was controlling them. "It's just a game," Makima finally said, her voice soft but filled with an authority that didn't match her age. "A game I wanted to try." Both twins tried to move, but the pressure was too strong. Unable to do anything else, Maki shouted, "Let us go." Makima smiled slightly and released the pressure, allowing both girls to collapse to the ground, gasping. Maki immediately stood up, her eyes fixed on her young cousin. Despite her age, Makima was clearly a threat, not because she used cursed energy simply, but because of the power she seemed to hold over others' wills. "Don't do that again," Maki growled, trying to maintain her composure. Makima just tilted her head. "I won't, if you behave." Mai, still on the ground, looked at Makima with fear. She knew something about her was different. And though the Zenin clan was full of powerful sorcerers, none had the kind of control Makima seemed to wield with such little effort. The fate of the Zenin clan had begun to shift from the moment Makima was born, though few realized it yet. But Maki knew from that instant, her cousin wouldn't be someone they could ignore. Makima wasn't just strong, she was control itself. 6 comments 0 vote. Chapter 2. Control. Naoya had always felt a mild disdain toward his younger sister, Makima. Like many women in the Zenin clan, he assumed she would be a weak and useless sorcerer. But everything changed the day he discovered she possessed a technique never before seen in their family. During a training session, Makima revealed her ability for the first time. She raised her hand toward him, only to be confused when nothing happened. Naoya laughed. Nothing occurred, and he told himself her technique was insignificant. However, he was completely wrong. A moment later, golden chains appeared from nowhere, shooting toward him with surprising speed. He tried to dodge them, but they caught him off guard. One of the chains pierced him, and for a second, he thought it was the end. However, he felt no pain, at least, not yet. Then, he heard his sister's calm voice say, "Kneel." An immense force crushed him, forcing him to drop to his knees. Every attempt to resist caused excruciating pain in his head, as if his skull were about to explode. Then, Makima's next words left him in shock, "Eat the dog's poop." As if obeying the will of a god, Naoya began crawling toward one of the dog's droppings on the estate. He fought with all his might to stop, but it was useless. He was inches away from following through with the command when, suddenly, Makima released him. "It was a joke," she said with an innocent smile. "Were you really going to do it?" Naoya collapsed on the ground, panting, stunned by the horrible experience. He looked up at his sister and, for the first time, observed her closely. Her golden eyes, so similar to his, now had concentric circles within them, a hypnotic pattern that seemed to control even his will. "You're not mad, are you?" Makima asked, tilting her head with slight concern. Among all her siblings, Naoya was the only one she liked. She didn't want to ruin whatever little relationship they had, if any had ever existed. Naoya stood up, brushing the dust off. He looked at his sister, now with a mix of respect and fear. Well, I'm going to bed. I'm feeling tired after all this, Makima said as she quietly left. Naoya was left alone with the unsettling thought that his sister might cause him a lot of trouble in the future. Makima slowly walked toward her mother's room, Kaori Zenin. It was striking how similar they looked. Both shared the same red hair, golden eyes, and skin tone. However, now there was a big difference. Makima's eyes had changed, with concentric rings appearing within them since the day she awakened her cursed technique. She remembered that day clearly. It had been a few months ago. An unbearable pain suddenly invaded her head, so much so that, for the first time, she cried in agony. Her mother, hearing her cries, rushed to her side and embraced her, assuring her it would pass. After a few minutes, the pain disappeared, but something else had activated inside her. A series of images filled her mind, as if they were memories or fragments of something deeper. Confused, she imitated one of the visions. She raised her hand, and a golden chain emerged from her palm. In her mind, a word repeated, control, attack. She chose, attack. The chain flew toward a wooden wall and shattered it into pieces. Alarmed, her mother asked her to stop. Obeying, Makima closed her fist, and the chain vanished. When she saw her eyes reflected in her mother's, she noticed the change. The concentric circles seemed to hypnotize anyone who looked at them for too long. Makima, her mother whispered, both impressed and fearful. From that day, Kaori Zenin understood that her daughter wasn't just special, she was dangerous. Makima stopped in front of her mother's room and slowly opened the door. Kaori was sitting next to a small lamp, reading an ancient clan scroll. Feeling her daughter's presence, she looked up, and for a moment, their eyes met. The circles in Makima's eyes hypnotized her once again, as they always did whenever she saw them. That strange sensation of losing control ran down her spine, but she tried her best to hide it. "What's the matter, dear?" her mother asked softly, putting the scroll aside. She knew something had changed in her daughter but didn't yet understand the full extent of her technique. Since she awakened that power, little Makima no longer seemed like the sweet girl she once was. Makima, with her usual nonchalant expression, walked to the center of the room. "I trained with Naoya today. I wanted to see how far my technique could go." She paused, watching her mother's face tense slightly at hearing that. "Don't worry, I didn't hurt him much." Kaori sighed, relieved, though not completely. "Makima, you must be careful with your powers. Our clan is already under too much pressure. If something went wrong." Makima interrupted her with a small smile. "I know, Mom, it wasn't anything serious. I just wanted to see if my cursed domination worked on someone strong like my brother. The first command didn't work, so I tried the chains, and they did." Her tone was casual, as if talking about something trivial. "Although, I don't think Naoya enjoyed it much." She chuckled softly, recalling how he had knelt before her. Kaori frowned, but her gaze softened as she looked at her daughter's cheerful face. Makima resembled her so much, but the power she now possessed was something Kaori couldn't understand. She knew her daughter was special, but something deeper worried her. Those eyes, those hypnotic circles that seemed to have the ability to control anyone, reminded her of ancient Zenin legends, stories of dangerous cursed techniques that had been suppressed for generations. Makima approached her mother, leaning down slightly to kiss her on the cheek. "Don't worry so much, Mom. I'm fine, I'm just testing my limits." Kaori smiled faintly, still concerned. "Just promise me you won't abuse that power, Makima. It's dangerous. Not everyone is like your brother Naoya. If you use it inappropriately, you could make enemies in the clan. And outside it, too." Makima nodded with a smile, though deep inside, she knew the real enemies weren't within the clan. She was preparing for something much bigger, something even her mother couldn't imagine. "I promise," Makima said, though in her mind, the promise held a different weight than her mother thought. Leaving the room, Makima headed to her own chamber, where she lay down on her futon, tired but satisfied with the day's training. As she closed her eyes, she recalled Naoya's expression, first mocking, then horrified, and finally submissive. That feeling of total control had filled her with a strange satisfaction. She knew her technique was special, and each day she was more certain that she could master far more than she had been taught. 10 comments 0 vote. Chapter 3. Psyche. The wind blew softly, rustling the branches of the trees in the Zenin garden. Makima stood still, gazing at the sky. A small bird flew in circles, enjoying its freedom. With a lazy movement, Makima raised her hand, pointing her index finger toward the bird. Land. Without hesitation, the bird abruptly turned in the air and flew toward her hand. With precision and gentleness, it landed on her finger, showing no resistance. Makima looked at it with a mix of curiosity and indifference, as though it were merely a tool under her control. It seems to enjoy a lot of freedom with those wings, she whispered, her voice barely audible. With one hand, she began to gently tug at one of the bird's wings. The animal showed no reaction, remaining still under her control. Makima continued pulling on the wing, tugging harder. The bird's skin stretched, and the wing creaked slightly, as if it was about to be torn off. "Leave it," a timid voice interrupted the silence. Makima stopped, slowly turning her head to see her cousin, Mai, who had been watching from a distance. Mai's eyes were filled with fear, and her body trembled. It was as though all her courage had crumbled the moment she met Makima's hypnotic gaze. "Why do you want to hurt it?" Mai's voice shook as much as her body. "I trusted you, and this is how you repay it." Makima tilted her head, her expression unbothered, though a faint smile formed on her lips. "I don't trust." It obeyed. Her tone was cold, devoid of empathy. "It's just an animal, its will is weak. Easily bent to my control." Mai took a step back, her eyes wide with terror. The panic on her face became more apparent as her cousin's words sank in. But if a child came here, and fell under your control, would you hurt them too?" Mai asked, her voice cracking. Tears began to gather in her eyes. Makima, with a casual gesture, tilted her head as if considering the question. Then she answered calmly, without the slightest trace of doubt. "Of course not." Relief washed over Mai's face for a brief moment, but her words didn't end there. "Mother would get mad if I did." Mai's heart sank in her chest, the relief she had felt vanished as quickly as it had come. Her eyes widened at her cousin's chilling words. "What?" was all she could manage to say. Makima paid her no further attention. Without hesitation, in a swift motion, she ripped off the bird's wing. A soft crack echoed through the air. The small bird's body twitched slightly before collapsing to the ground. It began writhing in agony, its body shaking from the pain, but its eyes remained vacant, devoid of the spark of life that an animal should show while fighting for survival. "I'm going to see what my brothers are doing," Makima announced without further care, as though the bird's suffering and her cousin's fear were irrelevant. As she left, Mai stood frozen, staring at the helpless bird's body. The sobs she had been holding back began to escape from her throat. Tears spilled from her eyes, blurring her vision. A cold shiver ran through her as she realized something terrifying. Her cousin didn't just possess devastating power, she lacked any compassion. Mai had thought that perhaps, with Makima, she would find a companion. Someone to share the burden of being a Zenin with, someone to laugh and trust. But now she realized her cousin would not be her companion. She would be her nightmare. An immense fear began to grow inside Mai, a fear that, despite everything, was mingled with a small but insidious seed of envy. Makima didn't just have power, she used it without restraint, without anyone being able to say no. And as Mai looked at the dying bird on the ground, she realized that not only did she fear her cousin, but deep down, she wished she could be as strong as her. After playing with Mai, Makima walked leisurely toward one of the dojos where her older brothers practiced. The place echoed with the metallic sound of swords clashing, creating a steady rhythm in the air. Upon entering, she sat in a corner, hugging her knees, calmly watching the sword practice. Her eyes followed every movement, every strike, with a quiet, distant curiosity. As she drifted into her thoughts, a voice abruptly pulled her back. "What are you doing here?" She lifted her head and found her brother Naoya's eyes on her, looking at her with a mix of irritation and surprise. Despite his stern tone, he didn't seem entirely annoyed, just puzzled by his younger sister's presence in a place she rarely visited. "I'm bored," Makima replied simply, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Naoya sighed heavily, as if he had expected something more significant. "You could go to the library and read," he suggested with little enthusiasm. Makima shook her head, her eyes maintaining that empty, mysterious glint that Naoya never managed to interpret. "I've already read almost everything there," she replied calmly, unbothered. Naoya frowned, clearly doubting her. "Don't lie." "I don't lie," Makima said with a softness that made him sweat slightly. He knew his sister rarely lied. There was something in the way she spoke that always made him uneasy. Perhaps it was the sense that she saw the world differently, maybe even better than him. Not wanting to argue, Naoya averted his gaze and asked irritably. So what do you want to do? Makima shrugged, as if the answer didn't really matter. Teach me to fight, she said, indifferent. Naoya raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised. It wasn't common for Makima to show interest in something as physical as fighting. Fight, for what? He asked, trying to understand what was going through his sister's mind. You never know, she replied, shrugging again. Her words were laden with ambiguity. Naoya considered refusing, but something in her posture, in the absolute calm she exuded, made him relent. Fine, let's go to another dojo, he said finally, with a mix of resignation and curiosity. Makima stood up without hurry, following him in silence. Naoya had always struggled to understand her, and the more time he spent with her, the more he noticed that invisible chasm between them. On their way to the other dojo, Naoya glanced at his sister. He noticed small red stains on her hands and frowned. Where's that blood from? Makima looked down at her hands, noticing the stains she had ignored. Oh, sorry, I forgot to wash them. You didn't answer the question, Naoya insisted, stopping to look at her more closely. I was playing with cousin Mai, Makima replied, unfazed. Naoya let out a laugh. Fighting, is that why you want to get better? Haha, the idea of his sister fighting with Mai amused him. No, it's not her blood, she replied coldly. Naoya's smile vanished instantly, his expression growing more serious. Then whose is it? Makima looked at him calmly, as if the answer was obvious. It was from a swallow. Naoya raised an eyebrow, puzzled by her response. Was it hurt? Did you help it? He asked, trying to understand. No, Makima said without emotion. I ripped off its wing. I wanted to test something, and it worked. Naoya's eyes widened in surprise before bursting into even louder laughter. Haha, what, are you a psychopath? Makima brought a finger to her chin, thoughtful, considering the accusation. I don't think so. I don't meet one of the requirements. Haha, and what would that requirement be? Naoya asked, entertained by his sister's response. I never lie, or at least, I haven't yet. I'm still too young to describe my psyche, but most would say I'm a sociopath, I think. Naoya stopped, looking at her with a mix of amusement and surprise. I'm starting to like you, he said with a malicious smile. Makima took a step aside, glancing at him. I'll tell mother, she replied calmly. Not like that, idiot. I'll tell mother you called me an idiot. Hey, don't do that. I said it with affection, Naoya quickly replied, his tone now a bit more conciliatory. Without responding, Makima kept walking toward the dojo, leaving Naoya frustrated by his sister's small but decisive victory. Both entered the dojo, Naoya still wearing an awkward smile as he reflected on what had just happened. 6 comments 0 vote. Chapter 4. Uncontrolled. It had been some time since Makima discovered that minds inferior to hers, like those of animals, obeyed the first command she gave. She tested it nearly a year ago, first with a bird that got her cousin into trouble with her mother after she was caught, then with a cat, a dog, and even a cow. They all obeyed, even when she stabbed them, they didn't complain. Her curiosity led her to try mass mind control when she came across a flock of birds. She did the same thing as before, but only a few birds obeyed this time. She concluded that birds' minds were too complex for complete domination. That's when she opted for something simpler, ants. Their primitive minds would be easy to dominate. She approached a colony, and with just a gesture, all the ants obeyed her command. Come out, she ordered, and immediately the anthill emptied. This time, there were no failures or resistance. Seeing the results, she crushed the anthill without a shred of remorse. Now, at just 7 years old, Makima was leaving the dojo with a towel around her neck, wiping the sweat after her training with Naoya. Despite her young age, her serene expression showed no signs of exhaustion. In a few minutes, she would have to get ready for her private lessons, but she decided to take a short walk before continuing her routine. While crossing a small bridge on the property, something caught her attention. Beside her, a curse in the form of a humanoid frog was watching her with vacant, disgusting eyes. With a disinterested gesture and her usual coldness, she murmured a word. Die. The curse, weak and without will, couldn't resist the order. Its hands began tearing at its own flesh, grotesquely skinning itself. The scene would have been unbearable for anyone capable of seeing curses. But to Makima, it was as irrelevant as crushing an insect under her shoe. Father needs to improve the seals. Even if they're weak, their presence is revolting, she muttered in disapproval as she continued on her way to her room. Just as she was about to enter the building, a sound stopped her. Repeated, furious thuds echoed from the yard. Curious, she followed the noise, finding her cousin Maki venting her frustration on a training dummy. Gripping a stick, she struck the poor trunk with such fury that it seemed about to break. Makima watched the scene calmly, until her cousin's voice startled her. Is something wrong? Makima's question was quiet, almost innocent. Maki jumped a little at the sound, turning to face her. Still panting, her words came out rough and full of contained rage. Nothing that concerns you. Makima stared into her eyes, her expression neutral, but that intense gaze was enough to make anyone uncomfortable. Feeling invaded, Maki averted her eyes and bowed her head. What do you want? Her tone was quieter now, trying to mask her anger. Lower your voice. I'm going to study in a few minutes, Makima replied, never losing her calm. Irritated by her cousin's indifference, Maki bit her lip to keep from saying something bitter. Her body still trembled with fury. By the way, Makima added as she turned away, as if what she was about to say held no importance, why do you even bother training? As far as I know, you're useless. Those words were the final straw. Maki's face flushed with anger, and she exploded. Shut up, she yelled, her voice filled with a rage she had been holding back for far too long. You have no idea what it's like to be me. You, who has all the power in your hands since birth, can't understand what it's like to be trapped in a useless body, constantly looked down upon by everyone. Maki stepped forward, the stick in her hand shaking from the force with which she gripped it. You don't have to work for anything. Everything falls into your lap. But I have to fight for everything. For every little achievement, and even when I do, I'm still nothing to everyone else. I'm not a useless piece of trash, Makima. Her words came out with so much rage she could barely control her breathing. I'm not useless, she concluded with a shout, her eyes filled with a mixture of fury and pain. Makima observed her for a few more seconds, impassive, as though her cousin's outburst hadn't affected her in the slightest. Then, with a small sigh, she turned and began to walk toward the building, leaving behind a trembling Maki, still burning with anger. Maki panted, each strike she delivered to the training dummy echoing with her frustration. Sweat dripped down her forehead, but she couldn't stop. She wouldn't stop. She struck again and again, trying to smother the whirlwind of rage she felt inside. Every time the stick hit, she felt a momentary relief, but the anger would swell again, stronger, more suffocating. She could still hear Naoya's words in her mind. The way he had called her useless during training that morning. The laughter of the other clan members echoed in her ears. The rage built up, forming a knot in her throat, choking her. And she could only release it with those strikes. But then, a voice interrupted her. Calm, serene, as if nothing in the world could affect it. Is something wrong? Maki flinched slightly and quickly turned. Her cousin, Makima, watched her with that cold, distant gaze. Still panting, Maki felt the urge to hide her vulnerability. Nothing that concerns you, she responded brusquely. She wanted her to leave her alone. She didn't need Makima to see her like this. Appearing weak in front of her was like admitting defeat. Makima didn't look away. The intensity of her eyes was enough to make Maki feel small, insignificant. It was as if she was reading every thought, every insecurity Maki held inside. Maki turned away, unable to maintain eye contact. She felt her cheeks burn, not just from exertion, but from shame. What do you want? She finally asked, trying to regain some control. But her voice sounded hollow, as if she had already lost the battle. Lower your voice. I'll be studying in a few minutes, Makima replied, emotionless. Maki gritted her teeth. It was always like this. Always so perfect, so serene, so untouchable. The fury inside her grew even more. How was it possible that Makima had everything so easily while she had to fight for every single second of respect? That's why Makima's next words, though spoken with the same coldness, shattered her inside. By the way, why do you even bother training? As far as I know, you're useless. And then, everything broke. The control Maki had tried to maintain vanished. "Shut up," she yelled, without thinking, her voice trembling with fury. She couldn't stop now. "You have no idea what it's like to be me. You, who has all the power in your hands since birth, can't understand what it's like to be trapped in a useless body, constantly looked down upon by everyone." The words poured out of her mouth without filter, loaded with years of resentment and pain. Every time she spoke, it was like a dam breaking, releasing all the frustration she had accumulated. She took a step forward, the stick trembling in her hand, wishing with all her heart that her cousin, just this once, would understand her. "You don't have to work for anything. Everything falls into your lap. But I have to fight for everything. For every little achievement, and even when I do, I'm still nothing to everyone else. I'm not a useless piece of trash, Makima." She didn't know how long she had been yelling, but her chest burned, her throat ached, and the tears she had been holding back threatened to escape. She was breathing heavily, trying to keep her emotions in check, but she was on the verge of breaking down. "I'm not useless," she screamed one last time, with all the strength she had left. The silence that followed was worse than the shouting. Makima watched her silently, with that unchanging expression that drove Maki mad. There was no response, not a single word. Just the same indifference she always showed. And then, without saying anything, Makima turned and walked away, as if Maki's screams had been nothing more than a faint murmur in the distance. Maki remained alone in the yard, her breath still labored, her hands trembling with pure rage. She felt like she was going to explode, but there was nothing left to hit. She could only stand there, empty, consumed by that mixture of anger and humiliation. And the worst part was that, even though she had shouted with all her might, she still felt useless. Makima's words had left her with an open wound, one that would take a long time to heal. She collapsed to her knees on the ground, the stick rolling beside her, as the tears she had tried to hold back for so long finally began to fall. But even as she cried, there was only one thing on her mind. One day, I'll prove you wrong. 8 comments 0 vote. Chapter 5. Dehumanization. Makima was sitting in the garden, surrounded by plants, seemingly staring at nothing. The wind blew gently, but her mind was completely blank, calm. Suddenly, a stream of cold water poured over her head, drenching her hair and clothes. She looked up to see a watering can emptying over her. Behind her, a maid, with trembling hands and wide eyes, covered her mouth, horrified by what she had just done. "I'm so sorry, Miss Makima," the maid exclaimed nervously. "I didn't see you. I didn't realize you were there." Makima, still seated, didn't say a word. She just stared at the maid, unmoving. But something dark and oppressive began to fill the atmosphere. The young Zenin's gaze was cold, calculating, and her lips curled into a small smile that didn't reach her eyes. Without warning, the maid brought her hands to her throat, beginning to strangle herself. Her face quickly turned blue, and her eyes begged for help as she tried to scream, but no air reached her lungs. She dropped to her knees, convulsing. Kaori was strolling through the Zenin estate gardens, enjoying the peaceful surroundings, when a strange sound, almost like a muffled gasp, caught her attention. Frowning, she approached the source of the sound, and when she arrived, what she saw left her stunned. In front of her, one of the clan's maids was kneeling on the ground, strangling herself with her own hands. Her face was blue, and her eyes, bulging, pleaded for help. Facing the scene, her daughter Makima, soaked with water, stood watching the woman's agony with a faint smile on her lips. "Makima, stop this instant!" Kaori exclaimed, her voice filled with concern and authority. Makima didn't take her eyes off the maid, but after a few seconds, she slowly turned her face toward her mother. Her eyes, devoid of emotion, stared back at her. "She got me wet," Makima said, her tone calm but cold. "She, who is just a servant, dared to drench me. The daughter of the clan leader. The future leader." Kaori shuddered, not because of the words themselves, but because of what they revealed about her daughter's mind. She had never imagined Makima thought this way, or that she was capable of such cruelty. "I told you to stop, or you will face severe punishment," Kaori warned, her voice firm. For a moment, mother and daughter locked eyes in tense silence. Then, suddenly, the maid released her throat and collapsed onto the ground, gasping and coughing, struggling to catch her breath as her face slowly returned to its normal color. Makima stood up calmly, her expression unchanged. I don't want to see that thing near me again, she said as she slowly walked away. Kaori stood watching her daughter, feeling deeply concerned about the personality Makima was developing. She knew the girl had inherited a great deal of power and ambition, but something in her seemed to be taking a dangerous turn, one that Kaori wasn't sure she could stop. Makima walked with firm, determined steps toward the dojo. She still felt the tension in her chest, that knot she couldn't untie. She didn't fully understand the sensation that dominated her, but she knew she needed to release it. Upon entering the dojo, the echo of blows reverberated off the walls. Inside, Maki was training, while Mai sat to the side, breathing deeply, taking a break. When the cousins saw Makima enter, both stopped. Maki lowered her guard, surprised, and Mai, who was calmer, slightly bowed her head. We were just about to leave, Maki said in a neutral voice, though a slight unease showed on her face. Mai stood up quickly, ready to leave, but before Maki could take another step out of the dojo, she felt a brutal blow to her stomach. The air was knocked out of her lungs, and her body flew backward, crashing violently against the wall. As she struggled to catch her breath and process what had just happened, she looked up and saw a cursed chain emanating from Makima's body, glowing with dark energy. Maki got up with difficulty, gasping, but before she could even react, Makima clasped her hands together, and several more chains appeared around her. Maki's eyes widened, her body began to sweat, and her instincts screamed that Makima's intentions weren't good. Mai, off to the side, watched the scene, her face paralyzed with fear. Her cousin's eyes showed no mercy, not even a trace of compassion. Makima, stop, Maki shouted, but her words had no effect. Suddenly, the chains lunged toward Maki with terrifying force. Maki tried to resist, blocking the blows as best as she could, but the chains were too fast, too strong. Each impact resonated through her body, making her scream in pain. Her skin was bruised, the pain unbearable, and soon her resistance crumbled. Maki fell to her knees, gasping, barely aware of what was happening around her. Mai, who had been frozen until that moment, began to cry. Tears streamed down her face as she watched her older sister, always so strong, being brutally beaten without being able to do anything to stop it. Helplessness and fear consumed her. Please, stop, Makima, please, Mai murmured through her sobs, but her voice was a mere whisper in the storm of violence. Finally, the chains ceased their attack. Maki lay on the ground, covered in wounds, barely conscious. Her muscles trembled from the effort, and her breathing was weak. Makima looked down at her cousin, her expression cold, without a trace of remorse. It's not enough, Makima muttered, emotionless. Then, her gaze shifted to Mai. Mai instinctively backed away, paralyzed with fear. Her lips trembled, and she could barely utter words between her sobs. No, please, Makima. Mai begged, her voice a desperate whisper. Makima said nothing. She clasped her hands once more, and the chains shot toward Mai, advancing at full speed. Mai closed her eyes, bracing for impact. But the chains stopped, just inches from her face. Makima, Mom is looking for you, said a firm, calm voice. It was Naoya, who had entered unnoticed. He stood, watching the scene with a raised eyebrow, as if it were nothing more than a triviality. The cursed chains vanished into the air, and Makima slowly turned toward her brother. I'm coming, she said, emotionless, not bothering to glance back at her cousins. As Makima left the dojo, Mai collapsed to the ground, hugging her legs, trembling with fear and relief at the same time. Maki, still on the floor, could only watch with half-closed eyes, struggling to stay conscious but unable to move. Both cousins were traumatized by what had just happened, unable to understand how their cousin, who shared their blood, could treat them so cruelly. Naoya, showing little concern, glanced at his cousins for a moment longer, then turned and followed his sister, leaving the dojo in complete silence, save for Mai's soft sobs and Maki's ragged breathing. 12 comments 0 vote. Chapter 6. Inhuman. This chapter was much longer than expected. Makima stood in an isolated corner of the Zenin estate, perfecting the technique she had recently discovered. Over the years, she had noticed how her control over lesser beings grew stronger. First, it was small animals, whose weak minds bent to her will, and then, with more precision, she had developed a devastating ability that allowed her to crush, shoot, or cut her victims without even touching them. As she aimed at a small rock, she calmly extended her finger, focusing. She whispered a simple word. Bang! Out of nowhere, an invisible projectile shot a shockwave that shattered the rock into pieces. A fleeting flash of satisfaction appeared in her eyes, but something darker resided there as well. She had discovered that she could manipulate this force to destroy anyone. In that moment, Makima decided she didn't need to see people die in an ordinary way. With her technique, death would be quick, invisible, and almost painless, but no less final. It was an evolution of her cursed domination, a power reserved only for her, an extension of her will over those she considered inferior. While she practiced, Kaori walked through the gardens, searching for her daughter, who usually spent her afternoons there with a soft smile on her face. She had spent months watching Makima with concern, knowing her daughter was special, but hoping she could be guided toward a less dark path. She heard strange noises near the hill and decided to approach, fearing the worst. When she arrived, Kaori froze at the scene. A dozen small animals lay dead around her. Their lifeless bodies bore signs of being crushed, cut, or shattered in invisible ways. In the center of the chaos stood her daughter, as calm as ever, pointing at a withered flower. Makima, her voice was barely a whisper as she watched the flower split in two. Makima didn't flinch at the sound of her voice. She calmly turned and met her mother's eyes. The smile she once had when playing with her mother had long disappeared, replaced by an empty, almost distant look. "You can't keep doing this," Kaori's voice trembled, not just with fear but with pain. Her daughter, the child she had raised so carefully, was now sinking into an abyss she couldn't understand. An abyss she didn't know how to pull her out of. "Why not?" Makima tilted her head, genuinely confused by her mother's reaction. "They're just animals, it doesn't matter if they die." "They're not just animals," Kaori replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "They are living beings. And you can't decide their lives like this." Makima remained silent for a moment, watching as her mother slowly approached. Kaori's eyes were filled with sadness but also determination. When she reached her, she knelt down, taking her daughter's face in her hands and looking her directly in the eyes. "You're not a god, Makima. You can't control everything around you. And you shouldn't kill just because you can." Makima stared at her, her mind processing her mother's words. But what she saw in Kaori's eyes wasn't a warning, it was weakness. She stood slowly, brushing her mother's hands aside, leaving the split flower at her feet. "You are also inferior. If I wanted, I could make you obey, but I don't, because you gave me life," she said coldly, her eyes narrowing. "But they don't deserve your compassion. And I won't stop." Kaori felt a chill run through her body. It was the first time her daughter had expressed something like that, a veiled threat, a warning that not only did she have the power, but she also had the will to use it against her if she stood in her way. "If you keep killing indiscriminately, Makima, I won't let you. I won't allow you to become something you can't control," Kaori said firmly, trying to appeal to her daughter's humanity. Makima gave her one last look before turning to leave. Her mother's words echoed in her mind, but they had no effect. She had a purpose, and no one, not even Kaori, would stop her. As Kaori watched her daughter disappear into the shadows, a lump formed in her throat. She knew Makima was walking toward a darkness from which there might be no return. With tears in her eyes, Kaori understood that Makima had not only mastered her technique but had also lost something far more valuable in the process, her humanity. Makima walked away from her mother without looking back. She was determined to continue perfecting her abilities, even if Kaori tried to stop her. Her mind wandered over her mother's words, but she found them irrelevant. The weak had no place in her vision of the world. She had a plan, and that was to get beyond these walls. Before she could leave the Zenin estate completely, a familiar presence interrupted her. Naoya, watching her from a safe distance. It wasn't typical for Naoya to avoid anyone, least of all a 10-year-old girl, but he knew well that his sister was different. He approached her with his hands in his pockets, his usual arrogant expression intact. "So, running away," Naoya said in his typical tone of superiority, though without the same disdain he reserved for other women. Makima paused for a moment, not turning to face him. "It's not running away if I never intended to stay," she replied, her voice emotionless. Naoya smirked. "You're smarter than the rest, I'll give you that. Not like the other weaklings." "I know that," Makima replied coldly, taking another step before stopping. She slightly turned her head toward Naoya, her eyes barely visible under the shadow cast by her hair. "I won't be gone for long." Naoya watched her leave, knowing his sister was unlike the other women he despised. Makima was dangerous, even to him, but she was the only one he wouldn't dare underestimate. You'd better, he muttered to himself, aware that no matter how much power she had, she was still his sister. And as such, she would have to come back sooner or later. But deep down, a small part of Naoya knew that one day she wouldn't return, and on that day, he would have to take drastic measures. Makima walked slowly through the city, savoring her newfound freedom. It was the first time she had stepped outside the walls of the Zenin estate, and everything she saw intrigued her. She had never explored beyond the boundaries of her home, a place that always felt like a prison disguised as protection. No one knew where she was, and that thrilled her. Her mother always kept her locked away, claiming it was for her protection, but Makima knew the truth. They weren't protecting her, they were protecting the world from her. Back at the Zenin estate, chaos reigned. No one could locate Makima, and Kaori was terrified. Last night, she had discovered what her daughter was becoming, realizing the growing cruelty within her, and now, the girl had vanished. She should have been training with her brother, like every morning, but she was nowhere to be found. No one knew anything. Kaori, more than anyone, feared what Makima might be up to. She knew her daughter had used her technique to escape unnoticed, and danger was imminent. Quickly, the entire sorcery world was given the order to find her. Don't look her in the eyes, was the warning passed between sorcerers as everyone mobilized in search of her. The situation was so dire that even Tengen was alerted. Meanwhile, in the city, Makima strolled with an ice cream in hand. She had ordered it without paying, the man had simply obeyed. She tasted it but found nothing special. Sweet, but boring, she thought as she continued observing her surroundings. She walked until something caught her attention. A group of children walking together, laughing and talking amongst themselves. One of them, a boy with a shy expression, walked beside a girl with a radiant smile. The energy they exuded was different from the rest of the people, and that piqued Makima's curiosity. She decided to approach. "Who are you?" Makima asked directly, her voice calm yet intriguing. Both children stopped when they saw her. Rika, ever cheerful, was the first to speak. "Hi, I'm Rika, and this is Yuta. We're friends." Yuta nodded shyly, visibly nervous in Makima's presence. She observed them closely, sensing something deeper in them, a latent energy that intrigued her. "And you?" Yuta asked, summoning his courage. "What's your name?" Makima remained silent for a moment, weighing whether it was worth sharing anything about herself with these children. In the end, she decided to give them only a name. Makima. Rika's smile grew even brighter. "That's a pretty name," she said enthusiastically. "Would you like to walk with us? Yuta and I were heading to the park to play for a bit." Makima looked at the ice cream in her hand, still unfinished, then at the two children. She didn't fully understand the purpose of playing, but something about the way they spoke made her curious. She nodded slightly and began to walk alongside them. As they walked, Rika and Yuta talked about their games and what they enjoyed doing together, as if they were in a world of their own, completely unaware of the darkness surrounding Makima. For her, it was strange that anyone would want to spend time with others just for fun. What did they gain from it? She didn't understand. As she walked alongside Rika and Yuta, Makima couldn't help but think that playing was an empty word. Until now, playing for her had always meant experimenting with her technique, making living beings suffer under her will with a smile on her face. It was a constant experiment, a routine she had perfected from a young age. However, as they neared the park, something shifted quickly, throwing her off balance. They arrived at the park, and to her surprise, instead of diving into chaos or pain, the two children simply started running and laughing, swinging on the swings. Makima stood in the center of the park, observing them, not fully understanding what was happening. There were no screams of despair, no suffering, only joy. It was strange, disconcerting. For the first time, she felt like something didn't quite fit in her worldview. Noticing her discomfort, Rika stopped and smiled at her, almost dragging her toward one of the swings. "Come on, join us," she said cheerfully, without waiting for a response. Makima hesitated. Whenever her cousins had tried something similar, she had always ignored them. They were weak, and their invitations to play felt empty, as if they were afraid to be around her. They always wet themselves in fear or left before long. But this girl, Rika, wasn't like that. She didn't wait for a yes or a no, she simply pulled her along without hesitation. How strange, Makima thought as she lightly swung on the swing, pushed by Rika. It was the first time someone treated her without fear or doubt, and that unsettled her even more. The wind blew gently as Rika and Yuta's laughter filled the air. Makima still didn't understand it. All of this concept of fun and play, was completely foreign to her nature. Yet, for some reason, she didn't get up to leave. Something held her back, something she couldn't yet identify. Most of her life had been spent experimenting on living beings, making them suffer, molding them to her will. And now, for the first time, someone had pulled her to the other side of that spectrum. As she lightly swung, Makima couldn't help but recall her mother's attempts to mold her into an obedient girl. Kaori had always wanted to shape her according to the clan's norms and expectations, hoping she would follow in her footsteps and become a respectable young woman worthy of their lineage. At first, Makima had tried to please her. In some way, she had wanted to be that ideal child her mother desired, but soon she realized that something within her didn't fit that mold. There was a voice, a deep instinct inside her, that told her all of it was pointless. Her mother's teachings, the clan's expectations, submission to those who thought they were at the top, it all seemed absurd to her. Makima understood that her potential went far beyond what others could see. What ordinary people perceived as the pinnacle of power was, for her, merely another step on a path only she could walk. Even in that moment, sitting in a park with two children oblivious to her true power, Makima felt that distance between her and the world around her. While Rika and Yuta laughed and played without a care, she knew her destiny was much greater than that of any ordinary person. This simplicity that surrounded them, this idea of fun, of happiness, it all seemed insignificant compared to what she truly desired, to dominate and control the world on her own terms. Her mother had always tried to instill limits, to teach her obedience, but Makima had left that idea behind long ago. She knew she was special, she knew she wasn't meant to be like everyone else. That's why, even though in her childhood she had tried to follow the path Kaori had set for her, she had ultimately abandoned it, knowing that the peak everyone desired was just another step in her true ascent. As her thoughts consumed her, Makima continued swinging slowly, watching Rika and Yuta with a mix of confusion and curiosity. There was something different about them, though she didn't yet know what. But what she did know was that while they lived their lives in this tiny world, she had already decided that this world would belong to her one day. As they walked toward the park's exit, Rika excitedly insisted they meet again. Yuta, though more shy, nodded silently, also hoping to see her again. In her usual calm manner, Makima suggested they go get ice cream. Both children exchanged awkward glances before Rika spoke up, apologizing, "We don't have any money." Unfazed, Makima responded with a simple smile, "I'll treat you." The two children, now visibly relieved and excited, accepted the offer. When they arrived at the ice cream shop, Makima ordered 3 cones. Without hesitation, the man served them immediately. The three walked out, Yuta and Rika enjoying their ice creams with joy, while Makima, for her part, reflected on the taste of hers. For her, it was simply another version of the same thing, different in texture and flavor, but equally dull. Her mind wandered, searching for something to entertain her when suddenly, something unexpected happened. A truck swerved sharply, accelerating toward Rika and Yuta. Makima, calm as always, came to a halt, watching the scene unfold without moving. But Rika, in an impulsive act, pushed Yuta aside with all her strength to save him, sacrificing herself to the impact. The vehicle hit her brutally, sending her body flying through the air until it landed heavily on the pavement. The sound of the collision was deafening. Yuta, letting out a desperate scream, ran to Rika, kneeling beside her motionless body, utterly consumed by horror. Makima, taking one final lick of her ice cream, observed closely, noticing that Rika's soul wasn't leaving this world. Something dark and twisted was brewing. A malignant energy began to emanate from Rika's body, transforming her essence into a curse. The profound love and desperation she felt for Yuta fueled the creation of something grotesque and terrifying. A spectral figure slowly emerged before them, taking shape under Makima's attentive gaze. "Fascinating," she whispered to herself. Despite the terrifying scene, she felt neither fear nor sadness, but rather a latent curiosity. Yuta, enveloped in his anguish, clung to Rika's lifeless body, unable to comprehend what was happening around him. His pain was palpable, his despair consuming him. Makima noticed. She knew she could exorcise Rika's curse with a simple gesture, but something held her back. Acting impulsively wasn't her style. Makima recalled the one pact she had made in the past, with her own father. After that, she had lost interest in using her technique in such a way, as it hadn't worked out in her favor. But this situation was different. Rika had intrigued her, sparking a small but noticeable curiosity within her. It would be a shame to lose her, Makima thought. Not only because Rika was an interesting entity, but because she seemed to have something special. Makima knew she could intervene and create a pact between Rika or Yuta, one that would allow them to stay together under certain conditions. Rika could return to her human form, but with the power to manipulate cursed energy, an ability that, under the right control, could make her even more powerful than she could be in this form. However, was that risk worth taking? Would it be more interesting to watch her as a curse, grotesquely bound to Yuta, or to create something new with her own technique? Makima was undecided. An opportunity like this was rare. She could free them both and make them her servants, or simply let them flourish in this strange, disturbing bond that was forming. But how useful would that really be to her? For the first time in a long while, Makima felt doubt. Her fingers tensed slightly, ready to act, but something held her back. Perhaps, for the first time in a long time, she had found something worthy of contemplation. She had taken a liking to Rika, and losing her completely would be a pity. As Rika's dark power enveloped Yuta with twisted devotion, Makima reflected in silence. 4 comments 0 vote. Chapter 7. Hers. Makima made her decision. If everything she had planned in those few seconds worked, she would have a loyal servant without them even realizing the one-sided nature of the deal. Quickly, she approached the dying body of Rika, who lay in Yuta's arms. Without saying a word, she pushed Yuta aside with a swift motion and handed him a paper with an inscribed symbol. "Leave," she said coldly. Yuta, still in shock, looked at Makima. Her eyes, cold as steel, seemed like those of a demon. "It's an order," she added. Without knowing why, Yuta's body obeyed, slowly walking away from the scene, unable to resist the invisible force that dominated him. His feet moved against his will, while his mind still struggled to comprehend what was happening. Makima wasted no time, clasping her hands together and murmuring a command. Golden chains appeared from thin air, extending and connecting to the people who had witnessed the tragedy. "Forget this and go on as if we never existed," she ordered, and all the witnesses obeyed, their minds erasing the memory of what had just occurred. The incident no longer existed for them. Makima then knelt beside Rika, whose lifeless eyes showed there was little life left in her. She placed her left hand on the girl's bloodied head, closing her eyes for a moment as the pact formed in her mind. "Rika Orimoto," she said softly. "Your body is dying, but your soul can still be restored. I offer to heal it, to bring you back to life. In return, you will serve me. Loyal, faithful to me above anyone else in this world, even more than to yourself." Rika's soul, confused and frightened, could barely understand what was happening, but clinging to the last thread of existence, she whispered weakly. "I accept." As soon as the word was spoken, Makima felt a surge of cursed energy violently flow through her body. The chains of the pact tightened around Rika, and Makima felt her vast reserves of energy draining like never before. She had been called a monster for the amount of cursed energy she possessed, but this time she felt weak. Her body trembled, momentarily losing control due to the magnitude of the drain. Rika began to heal slowly before her eyes. Her wounds closed, and the light in her eyes returned, but the cost had been steep. Makima, gasping, staggered, barely able to stand. Still weak, she picked up Rika's unconscious body and slung her over her shoulder. She knew there was no time to waste. The massive use of cursed energy would not go unnoticed by nearby sorcerers. They would soon come to investigate. Scanning her surroundings quickly, she slipped into a nearby alley, moving as fast as possible away from the scene. She knew the sorcerers would come, but she had to make sure no one noticed Rika. As she disappeared into the darkness of the alley, she felt a disturbance in her energy. Yuta. Makima felt a pang of discomfort. Despite having physically pushed Yuta away, his emotional bond with Rika was too strong to break easily. Such a deep connection, born of love and desperation, was beyond what mere manipulation of bodies and wills could erase. Makima, still weak from the excessive use of cursed energy, paused for a moment to catch her breath. The girl in her arms was no ordinary child. Rika's energy since her death and resurrection was dangerous, chaotic, and most importantly, deeply tied to Yuta. Makima had underestimated what that bond meant. The pact she had just formed would not fully complete as long as that connection persisted. A part of Rika would still belong to Yuta, and that unsettled her. Tisk, how disgusting, Makima muttered, considering her options. Rika had impressed her, her energy more promising than expected, but divided loyalty was something she could not afford. Not if she wanted to use Rika for her own benefit. With Rika in her arms, Makima felt Yuta's presence getting closer. Although his body had obeyed the initial order, the bond with Rika was pulling him back, completely ignoring the physical barriers she had imposed. Yuta was desperate, and his emotional connection to Rika was so strong that not even the force of her domination technique could completely sever it. Rika, Yuta's voice echoed behind her, trembling with desperation. What are you going to do to her? Let me help her. She needs to go to a hospital. Makima stopped and turned her head slightly, her expression remained impassive, cold. She knew she couldn't afford to raise suspicion at that moment. She needed Yuta calm, emotionally subdued, but without directly confronting him. She slowly turned to face him, ensuring her voice sounded calm and controlled, almost maternal. There's no time for a hospital, Yuta. Rika is on the verge of death, she can't wait. But I can save her, she said, locking eyes with Yuta. The newly awakened sorcerer was still shaken, but the certainty in Makima's words made him hesitate for a moment. Save her. Yuta took a step forward, fear and hope warring in his mind. How will you do it? Makima, wasting no time, seized upon the doubt in his gaze. I have abilities that can help her, Yuta. I can heal her right here, right now. But I need you to trust me and not interfere. Yuta's eyes filled with tears. He knew he was losing Rika, and at that moment, any option that offered a spark of hope seemed right. Yet his instincts told him something was wrong. Something about Makima's coldness, her calculating gaze, sent a shiver down his spine. But what else could he do? Can you really save her? He asked, his voice breaking. Makima knelt again beside Rika, placing one hand on the girl's head as her wounds continued to heal at the cost of Makima's cursed energy and the other over her own chest, as if channeling the little energy she had left. Her expression remained unchanged, but her voice softened even more, almost as if she were speaking to a small child. Yuta, I want you to know this isn't easy, and this will drain much of my energy. But Rika, she's special. She has a strength most people don't possess. If you keep interfering, that connection between the two of you could complicate things. I need focus. Yuta, unsure and afraid, stood still, watching Makima with clenched lips. He knew something was wrong, but he was paralyzed by hope and fear. If she could save Rika, if there was even the slightest chance. Makima seized his indecision and began chanting softly, as if invoking a healing spell. However, what she was really doing was reinforcing her pact with Rika, binding her soul to her forever. The girl's healing accelerated as the cursed energy twisted in the air around them. Yuta, you must stay away from this process, Makima added without looking at him. If you want to save her, trust me. I'll do whatever it takes to bring her back. Yuta stepped back but kept his eyes fixed on Rika. Makima had momentarily deceived him, making him believe he was witnessing some form of treatment. Yet, deep down, something screamed at him that this wasn't what it seemed. Rika, please, hold on a little longer. Yuta murmured to himself, unable to imagine that his beloved bond with her was already being erased by Makima's cold hands. Makima continued her work in silence, her eyes reflecting a sinister glint as Rika's essence became more and more tied to her. She knew Yuta still had no idea what was truly happening, but that was only the first step in her plan. As Makima carried on with the ritual, her gaze remained fixed on Rika's body, but her mind wandered through dark places. The pact was being successfully sealed, and although her face didn't show it, a repulsive sensation began to coil in her chest. Sharing, what a disgusting concept, she thought, her lips curling into an almost imperceptible sneer. The idea that something belonging to her could have a connection with another being, whether object or person, was revolting. Nothing and no one should have the privilege of touching, using, or getting close to what she had claimed. The very notion of shared ownership made her nauseous. Why should I share what's mine? She repeated to herself, feeling her stomach turn at the mere thought. If someone touched something that belonged to her, if they tried to claim or influence it, it became tainted, defective. Everything had to be hers alone, unreachable for anyone else, without concessions or exceptions. The bond between Yuta and Rika was the worst of all. Pathetic, she thought, despising the affection and dependence Yuta felt for the girl's spirit. That bond now belonged to her, and the simple fact that Yuta still believed he had any right over Rika was as irritating as it was unacceptable. Her control had to be absolute. In her world, there was no room for sharing anything. Not objects, not people, not fates. Everything and everyone under her command existed solely for her, and the mere possibility that anyone else could interfere with her property filled her with a deep, almost visceral disgust. There's no room for two. There never will be, she told herself as she tightened the chains of the pact around Rika's soul. 3 comments 0 vote. Chapter 8. Only hers. Her body trembled as the last drops of cursed energy barely kept her standing. Makima, with narrowed eyes and ragged breaths, gazed at the spiritual bond that still tied Yuta to Rika. It was a curse born of love, something nearly indestructible. Yet now, that powerful connection was on the verge of breaking. The exhausting battle to undo it had drained more energy than she ever thought she could lose, but the result would be worth it. A barely perceptible smile began to curl her lips, a smile she never thought she'd have, one that came from a place far deeper than satisfaction or pride. It was the kind of smile one gives when they realize they've accomplished something that once seemed impossible. For a moment, her gaze softened as she watched the bond between Yuta and Rika finally crumble like ashes in the wind. The connection, so strong, so deeply rooted in desperate love, gave way to her will, as if the curse had never existed. The magnitude of the achievement wasn't just impressive, it was utterly divine. I did it, she thought, almost in disbelief, as the cold night air felt lighter on her shoulders. I broke a curse, one as complex as love. And then, she understood. This wasn't just a victory. This was a new beginning, a revelation of what she was truly capable of. Something that even the most powerful sorcerers hadn't been able to do, she had done it. Her mother, with all her warnings and fear of what Makima could become, had been wrong. There were no limits to her power, and now she knew it. That smile widened slightly. A goddess? No, I will be more than that. I'll be something greater. The satisfaction that surged from deep within her wasn't from merely controlling Rika or defeating Yuta, it was from the certainty that there were no limits to her will. Not even love, that force so many deemed invincible, had been a match for her. Barely conscious from exhaustion, but euphoric from the revelation of her true greatness, Makima swayed. The weight of her ambition, now more colossal than ever, enveloped her. Mother, you were so wrong, she whispered to herself. I won't be a goddess. I'll be something greater than any god. After everything that had happened, Yuta felt a deep unease in his chest. Although Rika was there, moving and breathing, a strange sensation overwhelmed him. He had lost something, though he didn't know what. Rika, he said, his voice laced with uncertainty. Rika's eyes slowly opened, and when she looked around, the first thing she sensed was Yuta's voice. Her eyes met his, and for a moment, she smiled. But something inside her felt off, as if something was missing. Rika's smile slowly faded, replaced by a strange sense of emptiness as she looked at Yuta. It was as if her feelings for him, once strong and pure, had been overshadowed by something she couldn't understand. Something had changed. When Yuta called her name, her first instinct was to smile back, as she always did. But inside, something was broken, blurred. Though her body moved, her thoughts were like tangled threads. What is this feeling? She wondered as she felt a tightening in her chest, like something essential had been ripped from her. Yuta's soft voice came again, concerned. Do you feel better? He asked, but his words seemed distant, like they were just an echo. Suddenly, a jolt ran through her when she heard a different voice. Rika. She slowly turned, her gaze falling upon a familiar figure. The girl she had met hours before was there, but this time, she felt much larger, much more present. Makima Zenin. The name echoed in her head, reverberating in her thoughts like an obsession. Makima Zenin. Makima Zenin. Makima Zenin. It was as if that name was carved into her mind, impossible to ignore. And when Makima smiled at her, everything in Rika froze. That smile wasn't like any other. It was a promise, an absolute affirmation that couldn't be questioned. Makima stepped closer and, with a softness that contradicted everything Rika felt inside, gently ran a hand across her cheek. The simple touch sent a wave of calm through her body, an overwhelming sense that everything would be okay. But it wasn't a natural calm, it was one that invaded, crushing everything else. Makima whispered, "Everything will be fine." And those words, which could have sounded comforting, felt like a sentence. Rika knew, deep down, she couldn't resist. Something in her had surrendered the moment Makima touched her. It was as if every fiber of her being was now guided by a will that wasn't her own. The thoughts of Yuta, her love, everything that had once defined her, seemed to fade slowly, eclipsed by Makima's presence. The emotional enslavement Makima imposed on Rika was subtle yet relentless. She didn't need visible chains or harsh words. Her mere presence, her gaze, her touch were enough to bend Rika's spirit. Every time Makima smiled, Rika felt like she owed her something, as if that smile had become the very reason for her existence now. The feelings she once had for Yuta crumbled, replaced by a new devotion, but this devotion wasn't free, it was woven with the threads of Makima's will. Rika realized that she could no longer take her eyes off Makima, and though she tried to focus on Yuta, each time she did, she felt a pang in her chest, a reminder that something had been taken away. Makima watched her with that same unshaken smile, fully aware of the power she now held over the most powerful curse born of love. Rika no longer belonged to Yuta. Now, her loyalty, her will, her very soul, were Makima's and hers alone. And that reality sank deeper into Rika with every word, every gesture. Deep down, Yuta felt it too. Although Rika was there, something was missing. Something irreplaceable. Rika was trapped in a new curse, one far darker and more twisted, Makima's. 7 comments 0 vote. Chapter 9, Belonging. Makima stood up slowly, feeling the weight of her own exhaustion. The air in the alley was thick, and in the distance, the presence of several sorcerers began to become noticeable. She barely had enough energy left, her eyes felt heavy, but she maintained her composure. She glanced at Rika, who still wore a confused and frightened expression, overwhelmed by the new and complex emotions surging through her. "We need to leave," Makima said quietly, extending her hand toward Rika. Without hesitation, Rika took it. Though her heart was still full of fear and confusion, there was something in Makima's voice that soothed her, something that told her following was the right thing to do. Behind them, Yuta tried to stop them. "Wait," his voice rang out, laced with desperation. The young man felt as if something terrible was happening. Rika was by his side, yet something was missing. There was a void that terrified him. He knew that this girl, Makima, had something to do with it. He wanted to get closer, but then he felt a chill run down his spine. Irritated by Yuta's persistence, Makima slowly turned to look at him. This time, her eyes shone with overwhelming intensity, far stronger than before. She had no patience left for him. This girl belonged to her now, and she wouldn't let Yuta interfere any longer. Raising her hand confidently, she reinforced her cursed domination technique. She knew she needed to save her energy for what lay ahead, but she couldn't let Yuta continue to be a nuisance. She wouldn't summon her chains, she didn't need that much to make him yield. "Leave, now," Makima's voice echoed in the air like an unyielding command. Yuta's body shook violently, as if something invisible was crushing him. He could feel his mind fighting to resist, but the harder he tried to disobey, the more unbearable the pressure in his head became. It was as if an invisible wall was pressing him down from within, suffocating any attempt at rebellion. Yuta knew what was happening. He knew his will was being broken. He tried to resist, his heart pounding as he watched Rika, his best friend, walk away with that strange girl. Rika, she didn't seem like herself. Fear gripped him, but he was paralyzed. Makima's eyes kept him imprisoned. The boy who had witnessed everything took a step back, frightened. Just moments ago, Rika had been lying in a pool of blood, on the brink of death, and then that girl, Makima, healed her. It seemed like a miracle, but something about Makima was deeply unsettling. Her eyes, those eyes were terrifying. Without another word, Makima turned away from Yuta and began to walk, taking Rika with her. The curse that had formed between them was deep, far deeper than Yuta could understand. Makima had decided, Rika was hers now. Gojo walked with his hands in his pockets, as the night sky darkened further over the city. He had been given a rather peculiar mission, find a girl, a possible heir to the Zenin clan. It seemed like a bad joke to him. He already had enough on his plate looking after Megumi, who carried that clan's blood, and now the world seemed determined to throw more Zenin children his way to protect. He sighed, annoyed by the irony of it all. He had received reports about a massive release of cursed energy a few days ago. An explosion so intense that it had attracted multiple curses. Several sorcerers had been sent to clean up the mess, and now, Gojo was there, sensing the same disturbance in the air. However, something unusual caught his attention. Two energies, barely perceptible but definitely present, intertwined. If it weren't him, no one else would have noticed. Uncovering his eyes, the world became clear before him. He began to follow the trail calmly. He passed through an alley, then by a burger shop, a candy store, and even a hotel. The trail seemed endless, until he finally reached a laundromat. There they were, two girls. It was 10 p.m., and both were sitting, one with black hair sleeping on the lap of the other, who had red hair. Gojo observed them for a moment, then checked the photo he had been given. He sighed again. It was the same girl. The weariness was visible in his eyes. He entered the laundromat, and his blue eyes met the golden eyes of the red-haired girl. In that instant, he felt something beyond the ordinary. The amount of cursed energy emanating from those eyes was immense, even though the girl seemed exhausted, not from lack of sleep, but from overuse of her power. Gojo Satoru, right? Makima broke the silence, her voice calm yet tense. The sound woke Rika, who opened her eyes and, seeing the man standing before them, became frightened. Until that moment, they hadn't had any trouble with people, but Makima had said she needed to rest. They went to a hotel, but Makima had never managed to sleep. She said that while her body was exhausted, she had never experienced the need to sleep. And what was worse, her body wasn't recharging its cursed energy normally. Makima's eyes, that immense source of power, seemed never to stop being active. Makima stared intently at him. "I'll take you home," Gojo said calmly, unfazed. As he stepped towards them, Makima muttered something, raising her hand toward him. She aimed at his head and released a small fraction of her cursed domination. Gojo tilted his head slightly, and the wall behind him violently contracted, crumbling into a small hole. "Hey, that's not cool," Gojo replied, his tone casual. When he turned his gaze back to the girls, they had both disappeared. He quickly scanned the area with his eyes, finding them 2 blocks away. How did they get there so fast? He muttered, intrigued. Makima couldn't take it anymore. She collapsed to the ground, gasping for breath, squeezing her eyes shut with the little strength she had left. "I was too careless. I didn't realize my ability to regenerate energy was so weakened," she murmured, exhausted. Rika, unsure of what to do, knelt beside Makima, clearly worried. Meanwhile, Gojo appeared behind them without a sound. Rika, without thinking, stepped between him and Makima. Though she didn't know how to use the energy Makima had mentioned, she put on her bravest face and raised her fists. Gojo looked at her and nearly couldn't help but laugh at the cuteness. This girl, with her determined expression, could kill any curse, but only from how adorable she was. He stepped forward calmly. Rika, terrified, threw a punch with all her courage. But the blow never landed. Confused, she opened one eye and saw her fist was just inches from Gojo, but it couldn't move any further. "Huh," she whispered, bewildered. Gojo just smiled and gently touched Rika's forehead with his finger, rendering her unconscious instantly. Now, his eyes settled on Makima. If looks could kill, he would already be dust. "How dare you?" the girl murmured, hatred in her voice. "Die." Gojo felt something strange in his mind, a pressure. "Die," Makima repeated, this time with more force, trying to activate her cursed domination with all the power she had left. But, to her horror, it seemed not to affect him. Blood began to pour from Makima's eyes, and her ears started to bleed as well. "You damned bastard, what did you do to her? No one but me can punish my dogs. No one," she screamed, furious. Makima was on the verge of collapse. Desperate, she tried to summon her chains, using what little cursed energy she had left. But Gojo was faster. With the same ease as before, he touched her forehead, causing her to lose consciousness. "Phew, that was intense. God, are all Zenin like this?" "Scary," he muttered with a smile, as he picked up both girls and vanished with them in the blink of an eye. 4 comments 0 vote. Chapter 10. back again. Gojo sighed as he carried both Makima and Rika like sacks of potatoes. The mission had come directly from Tengen himself, which already indicated how serious the situation was. Makima was not just any child. According to Tengen, she had been born with a power never seen before, the ability to control others in a much more complex way than the Inumaki clan's cursed speech. She didn't need to speak to impose her will. With just a glance, anyone who lacked sufficient strength or willpower would bend to her whims. A ticking time bomb, literally, Gojo thought, observing the unconscious girl in his arms. As dangerous as she was incredibly weakened, which could only mean that the explosion of cursed energy in the city had been caused by her. And the most curious part, it seemed to be residual energy. Hey, this girl is definitely dangerous, he thought out loud. If she keeps this up, she'll soon be a problem even for me, he stopped, smiling to himself. Maybe I should keep her closer to me. He tilted his head towards the other girl, Rika, who remained unconscious. He hadn't been told anything about her, but she seemed to be a friend of Makima's, though he'd never seen someone call a friend their dog. They must be really close, he laughed to himself. Rika's cursed energy was considerable, though immature, indicating that either she had never used it before or had only recently awakened her abilities. Gojo reached the entrance of the estate, where the guards let him pass without much questioning. As soon as he set foot inside, a woman came running toward him as if the world were ending. Oh, well, Gojo muttered, about to greet her when he saw how the woman took Makima into her arms and hugged her, thanking the gods for her return. However, her expression changed when she noticed the blood and dirt covering the girl. The woman looked up, glaring at him as if he were the cause of it all. Hey, don't look at me, she was like that when I found her, Gojo said, raising his hands in a gesture of innocence. The woman said nothing more and hurried off, leaving Gojo still holding one girl in his arms. And now what? He murmured, looking at Rika. In the end, he let out a long sigh and walked further inside, thinking that, as much as he was the strongest sorcerer, taking care of Zenin children was starting to become a recurring task in his life. Gojo entered the Zenin estate with Rika still in his arms. The young girl slept deeply, oblivious to the chaos that reigned in the mansion. Everyone present looked at him with a mix of wariness and fear, but, as usual, no one dared to confront him. Satoru always had that effect on others, which he found quite amusing. However, his carefree expression changed when he asked in a relaxed tone. Where can I leave Makima's friend? A servant pointed toward a nearby room, and Gojo, wasting no time, headed there. He opened the door and gently laid Rika on the bed. The girl looked tired, though not as much as Makima. After making sure she was comfortable, he was about to leave but was interrupted. Naobito Zenin appeared in the hallway, walking briskly toward him. Wait, Gojo, don't leave without receiving your reward for bringing my daughter back. Gojo shook his head slightly, without stopping. No, it was a gift from Tengen, Naobito. I just completed a mission. Though, to be honest, you'll probably receive a letter from Tengen soon. He'll likely want you to send Makima to one of the sorcery schools. Naobito frowned, but before he could respond, Gojo had already disappeared, leaving behind the kind of emptiness only he knew how to create. The Zenin clan leader sighed, tired of the white-haired man's arrogance. Deciding to leave the matter for later, he headed to the bath where his wife, Kaori, was caring for Makima. Upon entering, he saw Kaori with a somber expression, bathing the still unconscious Makima. Water dripped gently onto the girl's skin as her mother carefully tried to clean her. How is she? Naobito asked cautiously, approaching. Kaori didn't respond immediately. She seemed lost in thought, as if processing what was happening to Makima was too painful. Finally, after a few seconds, she spoke softly, her voice almost breaking. Bad. It looks like she overused her technique somehow. She's weak, her brain is overloaded, she'll need a long time to recover. Naobito just nodded, taking in what his wife said but without really knowing how to act. The Zenin clan's pride and expectations always blinded him to the emotional needs of his own. He decided to leave silently, leaving Kaori alone with her daughter. Kaori continued to bathe Makima with motherly care, and though she tried to stay strong, tears began to well up in her eyes. Why? She murmured through clenched teeth, struggling to maintain her composure. Why does this have to happen? Why must my daughter bear so much? The tears finally spilled over, falling silently as she continued caring for her daughter, the pain of a mother who couldn't protect her from the fate awaiting her. Naoya walked through the city streets, his face twisted in a mix of impatience and frustration. He had been searching relentlessly for days, combing through every corner, every alley, every clue that could lead him to his sister. His desperation was palpable, but his pride wouldn't let him admit it. He never thought he would care so much about someone else, especially his little sister. But Makima, she had something special, something that made him feel connected to her in a way he hadn't experienced with anyone else. Just as he was about to enter another alley, a sound stopped him in his tracks. His phone vibrated in his pocket. Quickly pulling it out, he saw he had received a message. When he opened it, his eyes widened slightly. It was from his father. "Your sister has been found. She's home." Unconsciously, Naoya let out a long sigh of relief. He hadn't realized until that moment just how much the anxiety had affected him. It had been several days since Makima had disappeared, and though he would never admit it, the fear of losing her had been consuming him. For someone like him, who usually viewed everything with disdain, this was a strange sensation. Makima, that girl was strong, more capable than anyone in the clan could imagine, even more than him in some respects. Though he would never say it aloud, he admired her potential. She had something of him in her, that tenacity, that inner fire that made her unique. But still, her disappearance had driven him crazy. Wasting no more time, Naoya began to run, pushing his way through the crowded city streets. His heart pounded, but not from fatigue, from the need to make sure Makima was okay. Every step brought him closer to home, and with it, the certainty that his sister was safe. When he reached the estate, he practically burst through the door, not caring about the bewildered looks from the servants. The only thing on his mind was seeing her, making sure she was back, that she was okay.